Hi, this is the progress of making my Moana top. I went through quite a few different ideas. First of all, I tried to make it all in one without any seams, which, as you'll see in a minute when I get somebody to pin it to me, it doesn't quite work. So I had to go ahead and put some seams in. Okay, this is the all-in-one piece that I tried. It doesn't have any seams. It seems okay around the back, but obviously when you have a bust, even as small as me, you're still going to get a lot of issues with a lot of excess here, which we really don't want. So to do that, you have to put seams in, and then that will make all the difference. I then tested another idea with front seams, a side seam and a back seam, but really I wanted to try and eliminate as many seams as I can. So then I did another one just with seams down the bust, and the rest had no seams, and I'll show you that now. Okay, just bear with me on this one because this one's work in progress. I was practicing with my pattern, but just so you can see, I've now got just a front section cut on the fold with the bust seam, and then this continues around to my back. At the moment it's slightly too short, so you can see I've just made a note. You need another centimetre on each side. This is why I always do practice runs first. I've also practiced with my flap over the top here, getting the shaping on that. Now I'll just move on to the pattern. Okay, so putting seams in obviously makes it a little bit trickier to do your pattern on the flat. So, as this is my first time ever pattern matching, I had really no idea how the best way to do this. What I did is actually sewed the seams down properly either side on the machine, and then I got my template, which will the templates will be put on my website, so you can use them if you like. But what I did is, you can see here, I've placed it on, and I've done a mark here where the seam starts at the top and where the seam finishes at the bottom, and I marked the star, so I know if I paint any further than that, that is now going into the seam allowance, in which I've left a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance on my seams. So anyway, what I have to do after is split the pieces back up, because it will then make it easier to do your pattern on the flat. So what happened the first time is, when I split this section up, obviously I forgot to take into account that you're dealing with a curve, and this line is not straight. So I'll just show you here my pattern pieces. So you can see here, this is slightly curved outwards. This is the centre front on the fold, and this is my bust seam here, and this is the other bust seam, which is more severely curved, and plus it doesn't go quite down in a straight line. This is obviously where, when you come to doing your fabric, that you need to manipulate the curve into the slight angled outside here, and then that will obviously go in like that to meet the other side, so now it's at a completely different angle. So what I did wrong was, when I split it and I lined up my seam with the seam allowance, marked up the line I'd made, I thought, oh, it's going up in it's now going up in a straight line. Sorry, it's angling upwards. And I thought, well, that can't be right. So what I did is I then straightened the stars out, like so, on my other piece, instead of continuing off where I've marked it, because obviously the stars are perfectly level. So I went ahead and pulled it downwards, still trying to line up the seam. Unfortunately, when I came to pin it back on and sew it, now this is the part I was just trying to explain about mushing the curve into the fabric. And now what happened is the pattern started slanting downwards instead of levelling off. So I'll just put this back together and I'll put it on and you can see what I mean. Okay, as you can see now, obviously with the seams in, it's fitting a little bit better. You still will get a little bit of a gap here because obviously if you've got a bust or a bigger bust, it can't really be helped unless it's a stretch fabric, sort of like my top I've got, then it will mould to a bit better. But as you can see with the pattern, because I then straightened out the piece on the flat and put the stars straight on the piece, as I was describing earlier, it is now slanting downwards with the slant of the curve under my arm, which I really don't want because the pattern is supposed to be levelling off straight, which has sort of done my head in a little bit with the workings out on this because of working with patterns in straight lines and the nature of this top and the angles that it has. Getting this angle for the flap right was not tricky, but just a little bit involved. But basically you can see where it's gone wrong with the pattern. Okay, so I made up another top and I did the same again. I sewed it together properly and I marked the points on the fabric and the star for the seam allowance. Obviously you can see where it's creased here, that's where the seam was. So now you can see that the stars are going up slightly. So this is actually the correct way to do it. So then obviously, as I was trying to explain before, you've then got to pin your curve and sew your curve in, so you're now pulling the fabric even more in, and you're pulling this edge, which if you remember earlier isn't a straight line, you have to pull it in like that so then it's straight. So now you can see what's happening to the pattern. It is now starting to level off, so when it goes around you, now it's no longer slanting downwards. So I hope that piece of information will help when you come to do yours. It isn't wrong when you see that the stars, and after you've matched up your seam, you see them going off slightly upwards. That is correct. This is the fabric I'm going to be using to make the Moana bodice and sash. It's called Bark Weave Cotton. It's from Wally's in Bradford, UK. I'll put a link up in a minute where you can buy it from. It's a little bit expensive, but I think it'll be worth it. It has, like, I don't know if you can see this very well, a texture running through the weave. Again, it's a bit hard to show because it's really brilliant white. You can just make it out here. There you go. And it actually does look like it has just come off the bark of a tree. So that's why I thought this would be perfect to use. I've already picked my dye, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that in a minute. Okay, I'm just mixing up my dye here. I have this one from Dharma Trading in 419 Shine Red. Just bought a 2 ounce top. Now I've only really put, to start with, I've literally put about that much because the colour just explodes, so if it's not strong enough I can always re-dye it. And you need to heat it up to about 180 degrees, and you need white vinegar. I've also bought some more hot water to fill my tub up. I have now dyed my fabric. It's turned out pretty well. As usual with Disney, they love to do in-between shades of colour, making it really hard to find a suitable fabric. Unless you can find a cotton or a silk that's the right type of fabric for what you need for your project, then you have a better chance of dyeing it. So going through my book, I've got this Disney Art of Moana book, and I think it shows the images up pretty clear. And when I first looked at it, I thought she was more towards the red, but here you have orange and here you have red, and she's neither of those colours. So I don't really know what to call it, but maybe a rusty red orange or burnt orange, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty happy with that colour match. And these are pretty good quality images, so I don't think I'm going to get it any better than that. Here I am now, just in the middle of cutting my pattern pieces. So as soon as I've done that and I sew them together, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm just in the middle here of working out the top piece that goes along the top here. As you can see, I've joined my main pieces together here. I've actually put it on, and Mama's got a length for me just there, so that's where it will finish, because I actually made it a bit longer than what I needed, just in case. And when I come to cut this out of the proper stuff, I'll go through how I've created this. Okay, basically it's like creating a facing that would normally go and flip to the inside of your garment, but this time, like the skirt, we're flipping it back to the outside, so it becomes a kind of like a facing but on the outside. I don't know what you would call one that goes to the outside, so we'll just stick with that. Anyway, to create that, I got my original pattern pieces, and taking into account that my top piece here has no seams, I've marked on here 1.5 centimetres, which was my seam allowance on the main top, and I've done the same for the other side, marked 1.5 centimetres. And what I do is get my halfway point across the top here, and I lined up my marks more or less, and making sure they're straight, because don't forget, when you cut out your pattern pieces, this would be going in a straight line across that way. So as best I could, I put some tape here to hold it down, and I drew a line from the centre point on here all the way down to the end. So now I've got this shape. I then took my fabric on the fold and drew out the whole line across the top, which should be the same both sides. Obviously the bottom line is going to end up a little bit different. So what I did is, after cutting out my fabric, I cut it really wide, So then that gave me scope to actually draw my design. Now I'd already done a couple previous to this before I actually was happy with it. A lot of it was taking estimated guesses, and I had to actually mark, on my previous one I marked where my seam was, which was just there, and I'd put a little mark there and mark the same the other side, so I knew when I came to cut this piece out that would be where the seams are. And then basically I just had to use the tailor's dummy to play around with getting my line for this. Once I'd done that, I actually tried it on, and my mum actually put some pins where the line should actually go, so I wasn't too far out. But I've now got to retake this off and draw a proper piece from the actual fabric from it, and you'll see what it looks like. Okay, here I'm just setting up my pattern and my templates. What I've done here is pull the seam really tight so you can just see the stitching, and then make a mark where your seams finish. Obviously, as I say, you've got to pull this really tight out like that so you can get an accurate position, and I've done that both sides. I've just put a straight strip at the top here to help me get my edge, and I'll be doing the same on the bottom. I'm using Jacquard Textile Mars Red, and I've mixed some black with it because it wasn't quite dark enough, so just mix a bit of black. You can see here I've just been practicing getting my colours before I go ahead. I'm quite happy once you put the black in. The red on its own turned out like this colour, which was a bit too light. So I had a slight change of plan as I went along. I was going to split this and paint them separately, but I found if I just put some heavy weight on the fabric once this section had dried, then putting another weight and having two pairs of hands to do this, I could pull the seam, I could then pull the seam as far as it would go, put some weight on this side to pull it out, and then I was able to keep my pattern on it and just continue over. Just remember that now it's joined together, this is going to slant downwards because of the curve here that you've manipulated into your other side of your fabric for your seam. So when it goes on you, it will obviously straighten up like that a bit more, so just take that into account as you're going along. And same with this side as well. Remember to slant your pattern down with the slant of the line here, and then when it goes up it should all be straightened off. It's a little bit tricky to do. As I say, I've never had to match a pattern before on anything, so it kind of did my head in a little bit, but I'm most happy with the result. Okay, I'm just doing a temporary fitting of my top piece. I've lined it properly for now, just basically for my own convenience, just to make sure all the pattern is fitting in and where everything's going to go. And also I need to lose a bit more off the back, so at this stage with it made up, Mum's put some pins there for me of how much needs to come off, but I still got to line it, so I'm going to keep an extra 1.5 centimetres from this pin mark, which will be my final line for my seam allowance for my liner. that's where I am right now. I've now painted the pattern on the bottom here. Just remember that you need to leave a lot of excess fabric down here for when you do your scallops, that little wave pattern that she has, which I'm going to do on the machine. My pattern is just over an inch wide, about 1.25 inches. I've also gone ahead and painted the pattern around the top of the flap piece. Taking into account your seam allowance, mine's about 1 centimetre, so I've folded 1 centimetre over at the top, so I know where to start the edge of my pattern from. And again, this is about 1.5 inches wide. You may probably want to line your top, and there's obviously a couple of ways you can line something. You can create a totally separate liner the same way that you did your outer fabric, or you can flat line it like I'm doing here, where I'm taking my outer fabric and I'm just mounting it on top of the liner. And I've just very quickly, inside the seam allowance, I've run a tacking stitch just to secure them together as one piece. Here I have my two side pieces for the top. I've neatened the edges on the back here, and I've sewn on some pieces of cord that are going to make my fastenings. First of all, I went over it by hand, going over and over and over, and actually going through the cord to the back on all of them. Here is going to be my seam allowance, so you don't want to hand sew any further than that. But just as an extra precautionary measure, I've actually gone over it with the machine after as well. Just gone forwards and backwards, just for a bit of extra security, because it's going to be pulled quite tight. Next, I've turned my liner over to the other side, so now my cords are facing down. I'm going to put a couple of pieces of boning in, just to give my top a bit more support and to stop it bunching up and looking a wrinkled mess, because it's quite a soft fabric. I'm not going to use metal boning this time because it's quite heavy, and so I'm just going to use plastic boning. I've already put some plastic tape around the top just to protect the ends. You'll notice that plastic boning can curve quite a bit, but if you just run it under the iron, it will help flatten it out. And make sure you put, if you're going to put boning in, make sure you put it on the opposite side like I'm doing, and not on the side that's got the where the cord's going to be pulled. I've now sewn down my seam on the end here, securing the cord in place better as I go. I actually went over forwards and backwards a couple of times as I sewed the seam over where the cords are, again just for a bit of extra strength. So now you've sandwiched your cord between your liner and your outer fabric, and then you just need to turn it and press it with the iron the right way out so it's nice and flat. I've now sewn the side seams onto the top like so. It's slightly tricky. I would recommend trying to line your pattern up first, and start pinning from where the pattern is. So in other words, that's if you pin and tack like me. I started putting a pin from that point to try and make sure the pattern matched up first, and then I continued pinning all the way at the top and down the side, so I know that point should nearly be correct, but it's still a little bit tricky to do. I'm quite happy with that. I've now lined my flap collar that goes over the top of the top. I put good side to good side, and I've sewn all the way down here and across the bottom all the way to the side, and I've left the top open. Next it's time to sew the collar piece on, which is the flap that goes over the outside. You might want to do what I did and do a temporary tacking stitch to tack it on first and have a trial fit, just to make sure that your flaps don't end up too long, which is what happened with me. They're about 2 centimetres longer each side, so I had to take them in. Just remember to sew the good side of your fabric to the inside of your liner, so your pattern will be face down. And then I'm just going to give it a press with the iron and flip it through to the outside like so. I've now turned my flap the right way out, and I've pressed it with the iron so you get a nice crisp edge. And here you can see the cord ties securely in place. You'll notice earlier I only had 3 cords on the bodice, and I've now got 4. After doing 3, I felt it was still a bit too gappy in the middle, so I had to do a very slight alteration, but as the bottom's open, it makes it easier to get into, so you can just turn it the right way out. And just have to unpick the middle cord and remark positions to put an extra couple in the middle, like so. Work on the wavy line that makes the hem at the bottom of her top. I've been practicing on the machine. You can use a zigzag stitch to do a satin stitch. At first it was a bit too loose. You can make some adjustments to make it a bit tighter. I would advise practicing first. It takes just a little bit to get the hang of it, and I ended up drawing a line to help me in the end. But just coming over to our machine, I've got it on setting number 2, which is the zigzag. So I've put that number 2, and then this might need a little bit of tweaking. This is the mark where you would do, yeah, this is also used for buttonhole as well. So this will be your length, and I've got the width of the stitch on number 5. Okay, I've more or less worked out the wave pattern and the distance that I want it to be. Next you have to pull your liner and your outer fabric tight, so I use this sellotape roller because it's quite heavy. Just put some weight on it and pull it tight and put some pins in place. I've done this all the way along, and then I've put a row of tack in there to hold the layers together. I've now pinned my pattern on, and I've actually done a row of tacking underneath as well. I've also had to get a biro and draw my pattern onto the fabric. I don't really want to use pen, but it's the only thing I can get to work on the fabric. So now I have a line to follow, more or less. Okay, you can now see my line. To make the trim that goes around the bottom of the collar piece, I'm using 0.5mm thick hemp cord. There's approximately 30 meters in the roll.
With your hemp cord, we're going to measure out a length of cord that will wrap around your bodice top, and I think it's about 1 metre. And then we're going to times this by 4, so you're going to pull out 4 meters altogether to make one strand, and then you're going to do that again and make 4 of these altogether, each about 4 meters long, and then you're going to tie a knot in the end like I've done here to secure all your pieces. And I've got a handy piece of wood here with a decent drawing pin in it to hold my work down so it doesn't move. So now I'm going to show you how I've made my trim. You'll also need quite a few of these. They're offcuts of about 15 to 18 centimetres long, and you'll need 3 of them to make your spaces in your half circle, and 1 of them to make the T-crossing in your diamond. This is how far I've got so far, and I'm ready now to make another diamond. I've just tied a knot in my cords, so you have 2 cords at the top and 2 cords at the bottom. At the moment I'm going to work on what I will call the top cord, so I'm going to secure the other 2 away, somewhere out the way, and now I'm going to do 6 knots. Okay, you want to pull it so it's not very tight, but you don't want it loose either. And you want 6 of these. Will be number 5, and 1 more. Okay, now we're finished with the top 2 at the moment, so I'm just going to put those away under my leg, out of my way. Now you're going to take the bottom 2 and you're going to tie 6 knots. that forms the first half of your diamond. Now I'm going to put this out of my way for the time being. Sneak it under my leg so it's not in my way. Like so, and I've got my hands free then to work. I'm going to take one of my little offcuts, fold it in two. Like so. And we're going to work on the top two. That goes underneath both of them, and then you're going to push your two end pieces through that hole and pull it tight. Then that will push up against the first 6 knots like so. Now we're going to work on these little pieces. I'm going to put 8 knots in. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that is now going to be the middle section of your diamond. Now what I'm going to do is attach this to the bottom 2. So put one underneath, and we're going to tie 4 really good knots to hold it securely. I just want it to butt up to those 6 knots I did on the bottom row, but tie it really securely. And do about 3, maybe 4 really good tight knots. Just one more. Bit fiddly. Oh. Sorry about that, the drawing pin came out. So I've done my 4 really strong knots now. So we have the first half of the diamond. Now using the bottom 2 that I've kept out of the way for now, I'm going to put 6 knots in it. Okay, those are my 6 knots in the bottom row. Now I'm just going to move these out of my way for a minute. Tuck them underneath my leg. Now I'm going to work on the top 2 and put 6 knots into this one. Okay, so that's where we're up to at the moment. Now I want to close up that diamond. So I'm just going to hold on to where the last knots are, get all 4 of my strands, and now I'm going to tie a knot. Right, try and push a knot as far up against the last knots as possible. It's really snug. Just going to give a final tug on all my pieces Make sure that knot is firmly in place, and then you'll end up with your diamond shape, like so. Now I'm going to show you how to do this section.
Okay.
Right, now that we've done the knot, I've split the cords again, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. I'm going to work on the 2 at the top at the moment, so I'm going to secure the bottom 2 out the way, and I'm going to do 6 knots. Make 6. I'm going to take those 2 and put them out of my way for a minute. I'm going to work on the bottom 2 cords, and I'm going to tie 6 knots. Okay, that makes 6. I'm going to put those out of my way, keep them a little bit taut, and now I'm going to work on the first spar that comes across. So get my half cut and fold it in half, and this is going to be tied on the top. So go underneath, thread the 2 loose ends through your knot and pull it tight, and then push it up so it's right up against the first one. Now I'm going to do 6 knots. So now I'm going to use those 2 to attach it to the bottom cord. So go underneath with one of the strands, and now we're going to put about 3-4 really good strong knots in there. So that's your first spar. Now we're going to take the bottom cords and we're going to put in 6 knots. Right, so it now looks like this. You put your 6 knots in. I'm going to just put that under my leg, keep it taut, and we're going to take another offcut, fold it in half, pass it underneath the top two cords and pull the ends through into a tight knot. And then using those two, we're going to do 6 knots. Like so. And then we're going to attach them to the bottom two cords again. So take one of the strands underneath and then tie 3 to 4 really good tight knots. Right, so now we have our second spar. Using the bottom two cords, we're going to tie 6 knots. Okay, that's our 6 knots done. So I'm going to move those out of the way, just tuck them under my leg, and we're going to take another offcut, fold it in half, going to pass it underneath the top two cords, pull the ends through and make a knot. And that pushes, a bit tight, that pushes up against the first one. Now with those cords again, we're going to do 6 knots. Go. Then using one of them, we're going to go underneath the bottom two cords and we're going to tie our 4 knots. Lost it. There we go. Okay, so now we have our 3 spars. So what I need to do now is take the bottom 2 cords and tie 6 knots. Try not to get these strands in the way, keep them out of the way, you don't have to tie those in with your knots. put those two out of the way for now. Just tuck them underneath my leg, and we're going to go back to work on the top 2 cords. We're going to put in 6 knots. Okay, 6 knots, all done. Now we need to join the bottom to the top. So put all your cords together, keep that tight with your fingernail so it doesn't move, and now we're going to use all 4 cords to tie a knot. Keeping that knot tight up against where you finished. Make it really strong. I'm just going to pull on the cords, make sure that knot is really tight. And now what you can do is take all your strands and cut them off. Don't cut them off right up against the knot. Leave a little bit of space. Bottom of my diamond, and this is what you're left with. That's the diamond that you did, and now we're on to the half circle, and then we'll start all over again doing the diamond pattern.
Okay, this is the end of the completed trim, and I'm just sewing it, or rather to say tacking it very lightly onto the edge. It's basically got needle and thread. You can do this any way you want to. I'm feeling just a little bit lazy today. You could go through the middle and tack it on that way, or you could just come up and then go over the top of it. Because my thread colour matches so well, it can't be seen. But I'm just starting it off here. You don't need to go through every single millimetre of the trim. You can leave probably half a centimetre and then just come up. If you want it to be really, really neat, you could just catch the top of the outer fabric. But as I say, I'm just feeling really lazy, but if you wanted to, you could just go through and just take the top like that. So it's completely up to you if you don't want to see any stitching underneath, but I'm not really bothered. Okay, I've now finished sewing on the trim. It's not absolute perfection, but then I think Disney tend to paint things nice and pretty and neat and tidy, but if this was a hand-done garment done 10,000 years ago, I don't think it would look as neat as the drawing, but there we go. I kind of like it because it looks really old and vintage, and it does look hand-done. Next thing to do is sew on the shells. Okay, I've now finished sewing on my cowrie shells. There are 76 shells on this particular bodice. Next up, I want to be putting some beads on the end of my cords, and it's really hard to get a good look from the back shots on the film to see what type of beads, but I can see whites and browns, which I think sort of match the shells, stay in tune with the colour of the top. So I managed to find these, little wooden beads, decent sized hole in them, and I've painted them white using white acrylic paint. I'm then going to use some slightly smaller beads. I found these ones in a kind of creamy colour, and I've painted those dark brown. They're just on a piece of string while they were drying.